This is Red Moon, Purple Saturn. You have, speaking to you right now, Miss Amma and my cohort, my compliment. Say your name, babe.
My name is Kojo Jojo, otherwise known as King Jesus III.
Why do you have to be so retarded?
I don't know why that's so funny.
It is, because, Jesus is not real. But anywho.
First, second, and the third.
First, second, and the third. So, Hatepu, peace to all of you who are listening to us. We are coming to y'all with the second installment of the episode of Where Are Black People At Today? What is our reality?
We're doing two of these?
We said we were going to last time. We said we were going to break it up.
Goodness, it's a series?
Oh my gosh. This is y'all episode number 2. Don't mind Mr. Kojo Jojo. So, there was a lot of discussion that my husband and I have been involved in, both together and with people who we know, mostly in the social media world, where they talk about the idea of Black people unifying and the issues that may be behind that. Everyone's ultimate question is, why can't we unify? You see Mexicans unify, you see white people unify, you see Asians unify, but what's going on with Black people? Why can't we unify? And some of those people have voiced some of their issues that they've had dealing with other people, whether it be, simple stuff like being portrayed, if you have a project that you're working on together, and then some people decide they want to be the leaders rather than working cohesively in harmony with every person that's involved in the project, and you decide they're going to blacklist or ostracize certain people or a person that's in the project and, just stop talking to them or do some childish things that shows that they don't want that person involved. Or there are some people who say they will help and do, and you try to get a project on, but there's no more to hear from those people that you've engaged with before. Or even, on a serious note, some people may come together and they actually have children, and things happen to the children, all kinds of stuff. And we pose a question out there, and I hope our followers will add in their comments and their thoughts and suggestions about why is it that Black people cannot unify? What's going on? What makes it to where it's an issue?
Well, the difference is structure. You talk about the Asians and the Mexicans and the Indians, and how everywhere you go, every city you go to, you have a little Chinatown, you have a little Mexico, little India, so on and so forth. Even here in Atlanta, different parts of Atlanta and Georgia, you have little African areas that have a lot of African businesses, restaurants, things of that nature. So why is it primarily Black Americans can't seem to unify, or at least network and act in terms of the group, the greater group? And it begins in the family. If you want to understand the mental and psychological state, spiritual state of individual Black Americans and the greater group of Black Americans, you have to look at the mental, spiritual, and psychological, emotional state of the Black family. The Black family in America is a fragmented family. It is a dysfunctional, disjointed family. Mm-hmm. And it's a family that doesn't typically reinforce those types of principles and philosophies and protocols and attitudes and behaviors that are going to create out of those children, going to create adults that are prepared to run a city, that are prepared to run a community, that are prepared to create institutions and things of that nature. Like when you go into a Mexican neighborhood, they have everything they need within that neighborhood. And if they want to go outside of that neighborhood to buy things, then they can. But they typically don't have to. They have their own grocery stores. Some of them have their own schools. They have their own clothing stores. They have the basic necessities that they need. They provide for themselves.
Right.
And that's something that they learn. That's something that's reinforced within the family structure.
Right.
And that's a major part of why black people can't seem to unify, because we don't come, well, I can't say black people, but black Americans specifically, we don't come from having roots and behaving in that way.
Right, because I mean, even when you look at other blacks in the diaspora, like yesterday we went to, they called it a Ethiopian and Mediterranean restaurant or whatever, but really it was mostly Ethiopian food. And in that little complex that we were in, I also saw Ethiopian people having a brokerage for different types of insurance, whether it be auto, home, life. There was other needs to help people in being able to get their citizenship, immigration law and things of that nature. And then even as you drove around in the neighborhood, you saw a few of their grocery stores. Of course, if they're Islamic, especially if you're talking about some of the Ethiopians, a lot of them are Islamic. So they had their masjids and things of that nature. And then
they do it. They do it in the same space,
yeah,
which is also important. They buy out a lot, rent out a lot, and they put as many of their businesses in that same place, in that same territory as they can. And conversely, Black Americans, we want to get as much space in between each other as we possibly can.
Right.
You're on this side of town, I'm going to be on the other side of town.
Right.
That it's that individual BS that we're taught to have to place so much value into.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is, just like JoJo was saying, is that, this is not taught to us and instilled into us from early childhood, just the simple basics of, having a business or running a business, working for yourself. That is not really something that's happening except for the last, I would say, maybe 5, maybe 10 years. It's been starting to become more of a norm for Black Americans, but even still, there's a deficit.
The majority of us are taught to get jobs, grow up, and regardless of what your skill set is, regardless of what school you go to, the purpose, you put your skills toward, you put your education toward finding a job and working for some white corporation within some white industry, some white sector.
Yeah, many of us are, taught to work for someone else, go to school, get a good job, get good grades. And, even if we were to start a business, it's even taught to go to school, learn something that you can make a business out of, rather than given the empowerment to tell these children, certain things that will really just help them understand people. Because a lot of what my husband and I have been learning and watching and seeing is a lot of these people that are entrepreneurs that are not Black. Some of them may just have graduated high school. Some may be high school dropouts. Some are college dropouts. Some don't even go to college. Some may complete college, but many of them, they realize what they learned in school, they didn't really need to know to be able to start their businesses.
And they didn't need it because they were already a part of a greater network.
Exactly. And they knew that
before they were born into a network.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing that Black people are missing. That community, that interconnectedness, interdependency, and not seeing that interconnectedness or interconnection or interdependency as a weakness, but seeing it as an instrument of empowerment. White people, other types of white people, I'd say, not just the traditional, quote unquote, traditional European spirit of disorder, white person, but the East Asian, the Southern Asian, the Spanish, the French, all these different types of white people. They are born into networks and they utilize those networks. So they don't necessarily have to have these extreme years spent in colleges and honing skills toward this or toward that, because their families already own businesses. And even if their families don't own businesses, they have so many people around them that will support them and that will buy from them, because that is their intrinsic nature.
Right. It goes without saying. It's very much implied that you support your own. You don't worry about questioning whether or not that really does anything for you. You just do it because you know little Molly or little Tommy is getting out there on his or her own, and they are a part of your community. And
they understand that economics is war.
Yes.
And you're not going to win a war by giving other people your resources.
No.
And that's another thing that black people have to get get into their minds and get into it and get it in their firm and instill it in there firmly, that economics is war, just like politics is war.
Religion is war.
Religion is war, and you can't think that you're going to participate in another person's political system, another people's political system, another people's economic system, and think that you're going to be able to overcome them simply by implanting yourself into it. You have to create your own. You have to build that power up on your own terms and among your own people, and then compete with them as a group.
Right.
That seems to be what a lot of our people don't understand, is that we think that we can get in there and compete individually, and that we can just jump into different sectors, into different industries, and join people's corporations that are already established, and think that as we elevate in the ranks, that somehow that is going to contribute to black power or black empowerment or liberation and things like that, when it couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that the further you go in somebody else's system, the deeper you are in their trap.
Right.
And the more they're benefiting off of you, and the more ownership they have over you. So the plan needs to be for black people to establish our own economic system that operates on our own, African-centered terms and conditions.
Yeah, you keyed in on a point that I was just about to make, because regardless if you see these Asians coming into white European structures, or Mexicans coming into white European or Asian structures, or Arabs coming into any of these other structures, or people that may be slightly different than they still know at the end of the day, they still have schools, they still have communal gatherings and things that still help to confirm and affirm their identity.
Right.
That continues to show them who they are and their place in their community, and also on a grander scale in the vast global community. They know that they could be in the world but not necessarily a part of it, and many of them who do become a part of it, and let's say they come from another country and they come to America and they're now Americanized themselves, their families often are unhappy about that. But if they use that to their advantage, the families may look at that and say, okay, that may not have been a bad idea because you didn't lose yourself. Those who lose themselves to the American identity, then they tend to kind of push their family back and be on a back burner, and tend to be like, a white Asian. And I'm not saying like just a normal white Asian. I mean like a white Asian, like a European Asian. They tend to act like that and portray those type of thinking and mentality, and that's what basically black Americans, especially, and some blacks whose families have migrated here in America, and who kind of put away all the things that they've been taught and what's in their culture. That's how they portray themselves too. They take away their identity and try to put on the identity of what they think is cool, what has been pushed in media and school and other types of conditioning training, and wear that, and then they don't really know who they are. And I think that's part of the big issue, is foundationally black people, especially black Americans, and no matter wherever we unite in the rest of the world, we have issues of identity. And when you have issues of identity, when you don't know who you are, How do you know what you do and how you do it is really normal? How do you know what to do in ways to relate to others that can allow the relationship to be beneficial? You know, a lot of times we're still suffering from the generational curses, if you will, challenges,
generational assimilation
trauma that
really,
we have been dealt with.
Because you know, I don't really deal or ascribe to that whole generational curse thing. I think it's generational assimilation, being under the dominance of psychopaths, being under the dominance of sociopaths, and trying to assimilate to their quote-unquote societal norms, if you want to say that, their values, their more ways, four ways, whatever that term is, trying to fit in to their society when they are, you know, rapists and murderers. And, you know, they're one of their main methods of empowering themselves has been through, you know, genocide, and,
incest, rape,
pedophilia, and
all
these different things. So I don't see it as generational curses. I see it as generational assimilation to a system that was developed by sociopaths. And when you try to assimilate to a sociopathic system, a psychopathic system, then what do you think is going to happen to you? You know, when you try to assimilate to dysfunction, you're going to become dysfunctional. When you try to assimilate to criminals, then you're going to become criminal in yourself. Even if they tell you that that criminality is normal and they give you a rationale for that criminality, it doesn't change the fact that it's criminality. It doesn't change the fact that it's genocide. It doesn't change the fact that it's a new form of slavery.
Right, and it doesn't change the fact that even if you may have survived in certain circumstances and gotten through it, you're one of the few that can get beyond those type of obstacles or that level of traumatic conditioning that allows to set you apart. But you still are touched. You still are tainted.
But is that really what happens though?
I mean, some people they do survive. I mean,
I don't know if that is surviving. I think to say that somebody is surviving, I think you have to be. It takes a certain amount of liberation, of liberty, of freedom to really say that you are surviving. But when you are subordinated by people, and when the direction that you go in and the opportunities that are afforded to you are only are given to you, what's the term? There's only so much allowance that people have, especially black people in this society, and there's only so far they're going to allow you to go in this society. And all you can really do is, like I said earlier, is participate in this system. We don't get to decide. We don't get to distinguish or make any distinctions or get to decide, you know, how the power is going to be wielded or how the infrastructure is going to be established or what types of institutions we're going to have and what the purpose of the institutions are, what's going to be taught in the schools, where the food is going to come from, who's going to develop the clothes, what are the imports and exports, what are we going to create here, what are we going to develop here in this nation that's going to benefit the world. We do not make those decisions. So and those are the kinds of decisions that determine how people survive. So it's like I don't even see it as survival. I see it as allowances. Like we have allowances. We have things that we're granted, and we have space and time that's allotted to us. And if we step out of the parameters of that space or try to go over our time, then, you know, there are punitive measures.
So you're saying that based on all that, you know, black people take a passive role in how their community grows?
We don't take any role in how our community grows. You can't be a powerless people. You can't be a people that do not determine where the resources that undergird your survival come from, and then say that you are making decisions. Like, you don't even know where your food comes from.
Many people don't.
If you take your shirt off and look at the tag, it's going to say hecho in Mexico or made in China. You don't even know what types of fabrics are going into the clothes that you're wearing.
Or the way they process it, what kind of chemicals they may use.
You pick up a gallon of water, and it says spring water, distilled water, purified water, but you don't really know how they purified that water or what spring it supposedly came from. You don't know any of this stuff.
That's true.
You don't know any of this stuff at all. You don't even know how to build, how to construct the buildings that you want to handle business in, how to construct the schools that you want to handle business in, and what black construction company are you going to hire for that? And when it comes to going back to clean water and power in general, we're in Georgia. We depend on Georgia Power.
Yeah.
There's no black power company. We depend on the water treatment facility of this area. We don't treat and clean and purify and distribute our own water. We don't have control over any of the things that keep us alive. But we're sitting here talking about liberty and unification and whatnot. It's like, you gotta have power. And if we're going to unify, then we need to unify for power. Black people still want to unify for these fantastical reasons. These kind of, I don't know, just shallow reasons with no actual depth, no actual.
Well, part of it, yeah, they may want to unify in the sense of, well, I want to get rich, you want to get rich, I don't want to be impoverished, so let's try to get this money. Let's get this bag.
Yeah.
We may unify on that. We may unify on being consumers. I mean, I know everybody, regardless of who they are, if they're a black person or Achiwadafo. And when I say Achiwadafo, I mean whites and their offsprings. That means white Asians, white Europeans, white pseudo-Native Americans, white Latinos, white Arabs, all them people. We may get together and we're all consumers, but, we may get together to come together to consume items and things and, this stuff, but...
And we don't even have to come together for that.
We don't.
That's why they keep us here. Because we power the economy in that way as consumers. Because we have what black people like to talk about is spending power, purchasing power, which is a myth. There's no such thing as purchasing power. All you're doing is stimulating an economy that you have no control over, that you have no actual place in, except for on the bottom as a bottom feeder.
But you're saying that if we stop supporting these businesses today, like if all black people, especially in this country or all the way around the world, stop supporting the businesses and companies and corporations that may rape, steal, and pillage from us in many different ways, you think that economy wouldn't fall apart? You don't think there's true purchasing power in that?
No. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think you have to find a different term for it. You know what I'm saying? Because number one, the money that we're spending is fake. It's what as you know, they call it fiat money or fiat money, whatever the case is. It's not lawful money. It's just legal tender. It only has value because white people says it has value. So the actual money in our pockets doesn't really even mean anything to us. And what we're spending the money on at times is extremely frivolous. But to answer your question in general, I think if we stopped supporting this economy, and yes, it will crumble, but if we had power, we would be prepared to provide for ourselves when that happens. And if purchasing power was real, then when their economy collapses, our world would not collapse with it. And that's exactly what's going to happen.
That's true.
So you can't apply power to a word if it doesn't keep you empowered. If when things start falling apart around you because you stop participating in somebody else's game, but at the same time that puts burden on your life and puts struggle on your life and makes your world fall apart as well, then no, that wasn't power.
Right.
That was a fantasy.
That's true. You're right. You're right about that because we see that a lot. When you start looking at the game in economies and finance and investing and trading, you start seeing these little games that each country plays with each other. especially with that country in comparison to the U.S., whatever their partnerships. So, you look at China. They are buying up a lot of American debt. They're in a lot of our countries, building infrastructures and lending money and different things like that to keep their money low. Even though we may have trade wars with them and build tariffs, the real punishment doesn't get put out on them. It gets put out on usually the American people who can't afford that stuff. But, and when I say American, I mean, us black people who can't afford the stuff that they make. But, if America was to crumble, China will be easily and able to probably not suffer as much. Their economy will probably still be, be there, probably bailing out America.
Yeah, that's a reality.
So, and we can't say that there's any country in Africa that really has that kind of power.
Right. If it's real purchasing power, then you should be able to spend that money among yourself, with your own people, and remain empowered. Just like you said, China can. China doesn't necessarily need American imports. China is the manufacturing hub of the world.
Yeah.
Finished products come. Excuse me. Finished products come from China. So China does not depend on American goods. The problem is that no matter how much the world depends on African raw materials, black people still depend. Black people all over the world still depend on finished goods from white nations, because as the only industries that our enemies set up in the motherland in Africa were mining and extracting industries, because they didn't have any intentions of building or developing the industries in Africa. All they wanted to do was take from Africa. So they took all the raw materials, and then they established the industries that provide finished goods, finished services in their own countries, which empowered them.
Yeah.
So they just use Africa essentially as a battery. They plug the battery pack into their own economies and fuel themselves off of Africa and drain Africa. That's
but
all they're
I
doing.
think on some level they may try to go back, try to kill off all the black people who live in some of these countries that they are stealing from.
They do that,
and then go back once they're all.
They do that every day. Every day, when you send a black child, black teenager, black adult down into a mine to extract minerals for your multinational corporation, and you send that African person down into that mine without any concern for their overall health. They don't have the proper gear. They don't have the proper clothing, the proper equipment. They don't have the proper tools. They don't have anything they need to do the job efficiently. That's a death sentence. You know how many black people over the generations, over the years, have lost life and limb extracting minerals for white people? And that's just one example of how they've been doing, I guess you could say, a soft genocide in comparison to the hard genocide that we're historically known for, that they're historically known for. They do this in all different kinds of ways, by funding different groups and giving different groups that are in competition with each other, I guess you can say, in opposition to each other. They give one side guns and ammunition and starve the other side, and they'll do this divide and conquer technique. They've been doing this for thousands of years. As you know, you're reading The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. White people have been exploiting our differences, exploiting our troubles and our problems with each other, and dividing us for years.
Yeah. And they may breed with some of us, and and a lot of times leave those mothers or those people that they've bred with, those fathers or whomever, with the children if they give them the children, or they may just throw those children out, or they may keep them to raise them to hate their black parent. Or what have you, to make it unstable, not only in their minds, but a reality of instability. There may even be that. I mean, white people are truly like cancer.
Yeah, All of those foreign bodies that you can compare to disease, or that people that we know of as pathogens, whether it be viruses, parasites, different types of bacteria, helminths, whatever the case. White people behave on this planet exactly like those pathogens behave in a living organism within a body. It's what's the word? It's not necessarily symbiotic, because both sides don't benefit, but it's
still a parasitic relationship.
Right. It's true to the term, the parasitizing. That's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
They feed off of it and feed off of it and feed off of it until
the host dies.
Until the host dies, and hopefully by then they've generated enough germs, enough transferable germs to pass on to the next person. They've proliferated enough that this person is leaving disease everywhere they go, so the disease lives on through other organisms.
Right. Now, outside of the economy that we've talked about, because we touched on that, the economy is one issue that makes it hard for Black people to unify. We talked about the foundational principles of identity as being another issue, but
I think that's
very key.
That's key.
Identity is definitely key. When you don't know who you are, you will act any kind of way you can, based on the different ways that you've experienced in your lives, what has gotten you whatever kind of rewards. It's the same way that the body works with different stimuli. You
don't understand the power that you have to manipulate your environment, and your environment is constantly shaping and molding and manipulating your consciousness and your body, your spirit. As you say, that can leave you in a very dysfunctional way. So
the other part that I feel, and we touched on it a little bit in the beginning, is definitely family. Many of us, regardless of where we are in the diaspora, are often in a single parent home, and if not in a single parent home, we may not have any parents and may be raised by another relative or some stranger. There's people that go through the adoptions tract, and they're in foster homes and stuff of that nature. And if they're in other countries, that may not be the case. They may be raised by maybe people in their village.
And those things, those effects, the effects of those experiences can be countered as long as the people who end up as the child's guardians or caregivers aren't dysfunctional themselves. Dr. John Henrik Clark, I was listening to one of his lectures a couple days ago, and he was talking about, it's a very old practice to take someone in. They did it all the time during his younger years, and before that, you take people in. He was talking about how I guess his mother had passed and his father had remarried, and he didn't get along. Dr. Clark didn't get along with his stepmother, and because the community being so close knit, that wasn't a secret. They knew he didn't get along with his stepmother. The elders knew, other people knew. So one of the sisters, one of the older sisters, one of his elders essentially, that he was had the pleasure of working for or working with, she told him that if you're ever in need of a home, you just come live with me. I'll take you in. So it's not so much who is responsible for developing the child, whether it be the child's actual parents or a relative, or as you say, a foster parent, but it's the mental state, it's the psychological state, it's the spiritual state of the guardian that they end up in the care of.
Right.
And for the most part, regardless of who we're raised by, if the people who raise us don't have proper morals, proper attitudes, proper behaviors, if they don't have identity themselves, if they're dysfunctional themselves, then there's no hope for the people that they're raising. And that's what's been the case
Yeah.
here lately.
Yeah, many people are having children who should not be having children.
Well, at least not now, not in the state and the condition that they're in, because
Right.
that's how we further our race. We bring our ancestors back through proliferating through mating, essentially.
Right.
So
We
it's
call
not
that Bebra and a Khan, which means a
reincarnation.
reincarnation.
So I mean, every black person that's on this planet, and I understand what you're saying by shouldn't be having children. I totally know what you mean, but it shouldn't come to that. It shouldn't come to, oh, these people basically need to be castrated or infertile because they're so dysfunctional. We have to look at the dysfunction as a symptom and look at the cause of the dysfunction. And the cause of that dysfunction is being subordinate and being subjected under the rulership, the dominance of these white people. And as I stated earlier, having to assimilate into a society, into a culture that is dysfunctional in and of itself, because it was created by people who are dysfunctional, not having a divine consciousness, not having the Ba'et, which is spirit, divine energy, not having divine consciousness, not having divine energy, not being related to the spiritual forces in nature, not being related to or in essence an emanation of the Great Mother, Great Father, Supreme Being, which all Afurakani, Afurakaitnik people are, as children of Ra and Ra'et. That is the basic reason why everything white people create is incomplete and insufficient for black people to try to practice or try to gain any type of control or footing in or over, because
it's also perverted.
Just simply from coming from them makes it inefficient for us. There's nothing white people can create or have ever have created that was efficient for black people, seeing as how we are complete, we are whole. White people are incomplete. White people are not whole, and we are not compatible with white people. So there's nothing they can bring into the world that we should ever look at and say, yeah, that's good enough for me, because it's not.
That is true. So I mean, I hear you on the whole, thing. I just feel like when I say they shouldn't have children, I mean, like, if your mental and emotional status isn't there, or that you really don't like children and you really don't want to deal with that, there's other people who would love to have children who can't, that probably should be raising the child that you brought into the world.
Yeah, take the child in. Yeah, and we can't look at that as necessarily negative in and of itself. We're supposed to have a community structure that has the capacity to do those types of things.
And being able to help hold each of us accountable for our mishaps.
It's the network. It's the web. It's the real World Wide Web.
Yeah.
Not the internet World Wide Web, but the World Wide Web of people, individual people, families, neighborhoods, groups, tribes, nations, whatever you want to call them. We're supposed to understand our interconnection and our interdependence upon each other, and understand that I have my gifts and my tools, and I'm supposed to be able to utilize those gifts and tools in a way that's going to benefit me, of course, but it's also part of a greater system. It's also part, my gifts and tools have economic applications, they have political applications, they have social applications, they have militaristic applications. They're not just linear or unilateral. I guess I'm not really sure that's right term for that, but they're it's
it could be multifaceted and can use in a lot of different other ways. It's not just a means to an end for you to end your battle financially. It's not as a means.
Many plugs.
Right. It's not
many receptors and transmitters and plugs.
Right. Like, we're only as great as our whole. The family is a representative of the community, if so to speak. So it's like this bigger body, and you have this little cell. That little cell should be the representative of what all these cells come together to be. You know,
it has to go both ways. As the family represents the community represents the family.
Exactly.
So everything the community is should be an expression of everything the family is.
Right.
And vice versa. Everything that I am should be an expression of what my family is. Everything that my family is should be an expression of what I am. And we have to start seeing things from both ends. We have to start seeing the whole entire spectrum of this world and understand that nothing is one-sided. You know, that's why you have to flip the card, because you have to see what's on both sides of the card.
Right. Now, granted, we all are unique. We all have our own little energetic complexes and ways about us and way we think, look, smell, whatever. But it's still a reflection of the whole. You know, my husband and I, we both complement each other very well. You know, there's different ways in communicating that we both do, but at the same time, you still understand that when you see him, you see me. When you see me, you see him. And it not necessarily mean physically, you know, because a lot of times we are together, but sometimes, you know, it may not even be that. If you see how he thinks and how he operates, you understand, yeah, she's on that same page with him, you know. It should be that. And many of us don't have that. We don't, you know, we're so fragmented in both our spirit, our mind, and our bodies that our communities show that. And the community is that way. So why, you know, it's no surprise that, you know, on a singular level that we are like that, you know. And it is, on some levels, a result of the trauma that we've been through. But on other levels, you know, it's also the result of us not dealing with what we need to deal with.
Yeah, we're very soft on dysfunction. You know, I understand, like you're saying, everybody is different, everybody is unique, and yes, we have to accept each other's differences and, you know, unique qualities, but people accept dysfunction in place of unique. You know, like unique and dysfunction becomes synonymous. Like, oh, you just have to let that person do them. That's just how they handle that. That's just how they are. Let them be who they are. Like, no, it's a hallmark of maturity to critically analyze and to make critical judgments of every person, every scenario, everything that comes across your eyes. You're supposed to critically analyze that and make a proper assessment of it. And if it's dysfunctional, it's dysfunctional.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, that's just how they are. No, they need to be checked on that and called on that, and that needs to be corrected. The same thing within our own individual selves. We know when we are you know, expressing behaviors and attitudes that are out of order and that are not harmonious, you know, within our own minds and within our households.
Right.
You know, and if it's not harmonious within your own mind, then of course it's not going to be harmonious within the greater community.
Right.
So
and
you'll
feel it.
We have to constantly check ourselves. And if I have to check myself, then that means I'm going to have to check some other people too, because I ain't going to be the only one, you know, living in order around this mug. You know.
Yeah.
That's out of the question.
I hear you on that.
We have to stop being so soft on people's dysfunction. Oh, just let them be. No, you can't just be that. That's not. It's unacceptable. And this whole attitude of just let them be is how the dysfunction within our communities has been
continue to
allowed
proliferate.
to, you know, proliferate. You know, perpetuate the way it has. But ultimately, what we're going to have to do is create institutions that rebuild the main institution, which is family.
Yeah.
So we need to create institutions that can help to rebuild the family structure, and is going to reinforce, is going to support the family structure with the proper philosophy and with the true history of who we are and what the family represents and how the family is to behave and what the family means to the community and what the family means to the world. But I think everything at this point is a re-educational or re-educative process process at this point. Everything has to be retaught. We have to completely take that white man out of our mind and replace that with, the reality of who we are,
Right.
whether it be our traditional nanasom, which whatever cultural expression that you have an affinity to, because deep down within your soul you can feel that you are drawn to certain regions of the continent. So you may be drawn to Ife, Yoruba, Vodun, North American Hoodoo, which is a Akan culture, all the different cultural expressions that are rooted in the cosmology, that are rooted in the culture. We have to get back to understanding what those expressions really mean, and how to apply those cultures and how to apply the cosmology to our everyday life here today. We got to learn how to do that on an individual level, and of course on the familial level, if we're going to be able to recalibrate and get our balance back as a people. But this whole unity thing, we definitely need unity, but without the family structure back in place, without unity being reinforced from the womb on up to adulthood, then you can't just expect people who really don't know what unity is, because they've never experienced unity. You can't just expect them to think that, we can just pick these superficial reasons, these superficial reasons to come together, whether it be because we want to get some money, or because we just want to express the culture, whatever they think the culture is. I've seen some things called culture that have nothing to do with being black, have nothing to do with being African, but because people are able to apply it to this image and make it look African-centered when it really isn't, then it gets applied to the culture, and it really shouldn't be there because it's disorder, it's dysfunction.
Right.
But that also goes back to the re-education of black people in general, and I think we need to start that with the family. We got to create some type of institution, some types of foundations that's going to re-educate mothers, fathers, and children about not only the importance of the familial structure, but also ancestral religion, the cosmology, the culture, true story, true African history.
Right. Really empowering them about who they are, whose they are, the long lines that they've come from.
Not just the February 1st to February 28th type of history, but as you've been reading once again in The Destruction of Black Civilization, that type of history, that foundational history, and in other books that I haven't read yet, like They Came Before Columbus, and all these different what's the other one that I read by Dr. DeGruy? The post-traumatic slave syndrome. And just there's so many books. There's so many books that were written by our people, people who have taken the time and done the research and traveled to the continent and traveled to different parts of the Americas to really put this information down and get it solidified and put it together for us. And these are the types of books that, being African-centered, it's like second nature to us. So we kind of take it for granted. But there's an entire black populace out there that don't know anything about this information, and they wouldn't even know where to start.
Right.
So,
and we began that way. It's not like we just arrived here, and by no means there isn't saying that we've just arrived or that we don't still need to learn or do more with where we're at, because there's still more learning and doing that we need to do. And even though there's these authors and people that my husband have mentioned, and there's more out there that he hasn't mentioned, we also don't take all the word as gospel either. I mean, you have to still check it with your spirit, with your okrawa, your soul.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's people who, like you said, they'll take Dr. Akmos Wilson's words as gospel. They'll take, Dr. John Clark, Ben Yakinen, John G. Jackson. They'll take all their Sheikh Anta Diop. Yeah. They'll take all their words as gospel, but you have to realize these people were still educating themselves up until, I ain't gonna say until their last breath, but up until they couldn't do it anymore. Yeah. I'll say that. They knew that they were constantly in a state of, having to re-educate themselves and recalibrate. So even Malcolm X, it's just all these figures from the past. We have to realize that they were all still learning, especially the ones that unfortunately, met their fate at young ages. They were definitely still learning. Even Martin Luther King, he gets a lot of flack from the African-centered community, and you got to understand why. This whole assimilation and integration and the whole Jesus and nonviolent. He had a lot of stuff that was a bad idea, But giving him more time, even to be honest, Malcolm X, because once he came back from the so-called Middle East, he was talking about unifying with any and everybody he could to overthrow the oppressive system. And I understand that may have just been a strategy to overcome at that time, and maybe he would have went back to fuck white folks. But when he came back from that what's that, the trip to Mecca, what do they call that?
That was his
what do they call that trip to Mecca?
Jihad?
No, it's not jihad.
No, that's the wrong thing.
I forgot, but that's
too.
Neither here nor there. But once he came back from that, he was kind of like multicultural, basically. So.
And that's because he came from a different culture, not totally understand. Well, I'm not gonna say he didn't totally understand, but it's like when you're exposed to things and environments that are different than your own, and your enemy is different than the enemy that you know at home.
Yeah.
You may be more comfortable with that foreign enemy because you don't really know them. You don't know their ways of barring you or testing you or what have you.
Right. You haven't made the comparisons yet.
Right.
And you haven't seen how they're alike.
Right.
A
snake is still a snake.
Right.
No matter if it's in America, Brazil, the Middle East, Australia, whatever, it's still a snake. It still has a way that it needs to operate.
Right. But the point being is that when you're talking about your elders and who a lot of people call master teachers, your master teachers were still learning, and they still had a long way to go, just as we all have a long way to go when
Absolutely.
it comes to this re-educating ourselves and getting ourselves back on track. And there's a lot of people who have read every book that any black person has ever written. There's a lot of folks out there that's done a lot of reading now.
Yes.
But
well-versed.
But if you still have to have your proper sense of identity about who you are in the world as a black person, and who your enemies are in the world as a black person, and how your enemies are constantly 24/7 working to make sure you remain a laborer and a consumer.
Right.
Making sure that you remain basically impotent and castrated to stop them from imposing their will upon you.
That didn't change when they infiltrated Africa in ways of talking about trade and stuff, when really they were talking about power and dominion. And it did not change in chattel slavery. That did not change in integration here in the U.S., where they talk about the so-called civil rights movement. It did not change even now in present day. We are still working for our enemies. We are still at the bottom.
White people are not going to give up their power over black people for any type of so-called moral reason. It's never going to happen. It's never ever going to happen.
So, one more part of it, and then
we're going to wrap this up.
Gotta take that part out. So we've talked about economy, knowing your true identity, and family. So as of right now, we are going to wrap this up and say goodnight to you all. But put it in the comments. Follow us on Facebook as the Red Moon Purple Saturn, and our YouTube channel. And even if you want to follow us on Instagram, we are on the gram. Leave your comments, post your thoughts. Let us know what you think about what are other things that are keeping us as black people from unifying. And if in the tradition of what we like to do, we like to not only come up with what we think is the problem, but also try to postulate a solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you can do that,
Resolution.
Yes.
If you're going to interact with us, if you're going to leave your comments, there's not much we can do with your opinion if your opinion doesn't come with a resolution.
Right.
Because you better believe that we have heard all of the reasons and rationales that anybody's ever come up with about unity, black empowerment, yada, yada, yada. But one thing we don't hear enough of are practical solutions, practical resolutions, even some that would appear to be impractical at this time, because we have to get back to being able to abstract and get back to be able to create things in the mind that people may believe is impossible, even though those impossible things have a tendency to manifest when we conceptualize on them and when we begin to move in that direction.
Yeah.
So
that's one thing I will never forget this. One sister has always used to say to me, she used to say, necessity is the mother of invention. And she used to say that all the time whenever she amazed me by some of the things she would think of. And I'm like, how did you even think to do that? And it could be something simple, but it didn't matter, And it's because she always tried to push herself to continue abstract thought and thinking. And I never understood how important that was until now. So, like he was saying, they have a chain on our mind, even if we are so-called conscious or woke. I hate that concept. But, there's still a chain on our mind because we have to constantly keep being abstract thinking. We have to constantly keep thinking of new innovations that will help to liberate us and be for us, by us, and not whitewash, or should I say blackwash, white concepts. Because that's what we have a tendency to do. We try to hold on to, the things of our enemies and say, oh, well, that's good for us, that's good. We could use that. We could, the system may be broken, but we know how to fix it. No, the whole system needs to just be torn down and we start from scratch. So, yes. So, Heteplu, Uncle Jasanev, peace and blessings to you all. Please leave your comments and solutions and continue to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and our YouTube channel. This is Red Moon, Purple Saturn, and we are out.